I want to start by saying, as others have said, the past is truly another country. That past has relevance because without knowledge of this other country, we can know nothing of the future and very little of the present. Okay. Today I would like to show you a past that receives, unfortunately, little notice. It is the Native American past of the Mississippian period. It is the past that was honored in the poetry of William Cullen Bryant. If you're interested in the poem specifically, it's The Prairies. And also many other early American scholars spent time looking at this past. And in effect, it is the recorded images of a uniquely American civilization that is the focus of several scholars here at UNC. And it is a past that deserves not only our attention, but our deep respect. The objects that I'm going to show you today, sometimes they're considered Native American, they're considered this, they're considered that, but let me assure you, like the pyramids of Egypt, these things belong to all of us because it is about our history as human beings on this planet. And it is a wonderful thing to be able to see these objects, and I've been very fortunate to get to handle them. So without further ado, all right, this is what I want to do today for you. I want to illustrate the high quality of Mississippian art and cosmological symbolism. Let me just say something about what art does for these ancient people. The art for these ancient people does the same thing that art does in a church. It visualizes those things that can no longer be seen. Stained glass windows, etc. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, it's going to visualize their view of their ideology, of their belief system. It investigates specific images of beneath world power. I'm going to be looking at that today. And I also wanted to discuss this Mississippian period. I'll give you the dates in a second, in terms of what it means for our understanding of Native American culture. Okay. Now, this is the geographical extent of the Mesoamerican world. Okay. It's a very large area. For those who study Mesoamerica, it actually is larger than Mesoamerica, but it is not as geographically complex. It is riverine, and most of the major sites that I'll be talking about are located near rivers. Okay. It has long been recognized that there are distinct areas within the Mississippian culture that can be identified, that artifacts and other things can tell us that this is either Fort Ancient or this is Oneida or this is Cadeauan. Actually, out in Texas, we've got a lot of Cadeauan material. Okay. Okay. But recently, at my workshop that I'll also speak about in a moment, okay, we've been concentrating on style regions, on the area of style. And where is the trusty pointer? Okay. We have begun to see a Braden-style corridor and then a Bel Air style area that includes Moundville over here. Now, what does that mean? What that means is we have an area that goes from up in Illinois, actually it goes up into Wisconsin, down to Tallahassee in Florida. You got John Scarry over here, who's one of the experts in that particular site, where the symbolism is focused on avian and celestial things. While here in Moundville, and this area, and that's just being defined. This new area is just in the process of being defined. It tends to be more on snakes and beneath world power. We don't even know what that means yet. We're just working on it, trying to understand it. Okay, now the periods. What time period are we talking about? Mississippian period is essentially AD 900, 1600, 1700, depending on who you talk to. Okay. Its height in terms of art is generally thought to be the Braden style, which takes place in the Sterling phase at Cahokia. about AD 1100 to 1200. And at Etowah, a site that we're going to speak about today, that George Stewart began his career at during the Wilbanks phase, 1250 to 1375 AD. And then we know that these sites and their political structures existed up to the destruction of the Natchez chiefdom in 1730, when the French took the elite of the Natchez people and sold them into slavery in the West Indies at that time. And that's the end of this civilization. It's one that we can make a dramatic a reference to when it ends. Now, noted people recognize it. They're mound builders. Okay. We know that these mounds supported, in many instances, structures that were both the residence of elite personages, but often were temples and were burial sites for the highest elite. Okay. There was a strong interest in this material at the beginning of our nation's history. This painting can be seen in the St. Louis Art Museum. It's actually a huge scroll. Dr. Dixon went around the country, and he would talk about his archaeological excavations in the same way that I'm showing PowerPoint. He'd have people scrolling out the painting of the different sites while he talked about them. Now I have a date of 1843, but you know, there's always somebody. Vin corrected me, right? Said, actually it's 1850. So let me correct that now while I'm thinking about it. Okay, now, I have this Mississippian iconographic complex that we take place at Southwest Texas, or Texas State University, brings together, as Vin said, a large number of scholars trying to make some sense out of the symbolism and get some idea about what it means. Not just to reveal information to we scholars, but we are devoted also to return this information to Native Americans themselves, okay? Because it's like the last time I went to Paris, I stopped someone on the street and asked them exactly what turn did I have to take to get to the Louvre, and the response was, oh, I don't know, I've never been there. So a lot of Native Americans don't know of this aspect of their own history, and we're going to do our best to help them recover it. Okay, now, from Thomas Jefferson on, excavations were conducted. People had speculation that these artifacts were created by Phoenicians, by Jews, by Romans, by Greeks. It wasn't till the late 19th century that the American scholarly community definitively said that this is all a product of Native Americans. But what really in some ways brought this culture to the attention of a wider public was the discovery of a site in Oklahoma called Spiro. What does the name mean? Well, it was named for the Greek cook on the railroad, Spiro Epaminondas, and so the whole culture, Spiro culture, is named for a cook. And in 1935, the site of Spiro, which is right here in Oklahoma, or right here, had something very unfortunate happen to it. Okay. A group of unemployed individuals had themselves constituted as a mining company by the state of Oklahoma called the Bacola Mining Company. And what they wanted to do was mine this site for relics, and they would sell them on the side of the road. Okay. When they started tunneling, and I'll show you pictures of the tunneling, they found a really unique artifact they found in an enclosed chamber that was sealed with really wonderful preservation of objects within it. Now this is the Craig Mound at the Spiro site under snow, and you'll see that lovely mule coming out of the barn over there on the side. People in the area today, the local people say the site is haunted and that at appropriate times of year, wagons pulled by black cats will exit out of the mound, and I don't know if it has a reference to our fine mule there or not. By the way, I found out the name of the mule. Antonius was the name of the mule. Okay. Now, this is a cross section of the Craig Mound. It was actually a series of mounds, but this is where the enclosed chamber existed. Mm-hmm. Here we've got the Bacola miners in front of their tunnel. Okay. Some of their Bacola miners and some of their children play an important part in bringing the information of the Craig Mound to a wider public. An archaeologist came down to investigate because the antiquities market was being flooded with objects from the Craig Mound, and as he drove up, one of the young people had on his, wrapped around himself, a magnificent feathered cloak, all hand woven like Hawaiian cloaks, and he ran about, the archaeologist saw the cloak disintegrating. Okay, but the level of preservation was remarkable. Cloth, featherwork, all was able to be recovered. Okay. Now, unfortunately, positively and unfortunately, the state of Oklahoma passed a law that said you can't do this. You guys, we're rescinding your license to excavate. And their response was to take gunpowder into the central chamber and blow it up. Because if we can't have it, no one else is going to have it. Okay. Now, the WPA excavated in the 30s through the 40s. Okay. And in the meantime, people were collecting information from the looters about what they found in that central mound. And in some instances, that information is more accurate than what the archaeologists actually recovered. For one thing, they got north wrong on the survey, and how you get north wrong with a compass, I don't know, but they did. Okay. The major work today is on this site is done by Dr. Jim Brown of Northwestern University. He spent, I guess I'd say, a lifetime devoted to tracking these artifacts down and trying to understand it better. And he's done some remarkable things. You know he's a great scholar because he can do that effect, which is retract, without trying to defend something that he knows that is wrong. He will stand up and say, last year I told you this, and boy was I wrong, and I was wrong for the following reasons, and that to me is great scholarship. But he has essentially listed the numbers of objects that were found at different locations: 30 copper axes, 1 gallon pearl beads, a cane basket with 30 face masks, etc., 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 famous pipes, stacks of blankets, shell beads that were imported from the Gulf of California. And they have even found a piece of obsidian that can be, come on in, it's okay. Okay, that can even be traced to the Valley of Mexico. Okay, so there's a great deal of interconnectedness for this site. Okay, now some of the pieces are truly remarkable. This pipe, okay, was not carved as a pipe. It was a statuette made from flint clay. And we know where it came from. It wasn't made at Spiro. In fact, 99 9/10% of all the things found at Spiro are imported from other locations. Okay. It's from the great site of Cahokia and opposite St. Louis, and it represents a heroic figure that's still recorded in the folklore of many Native Americans today. It's Morningstar. And Morningstar is known as he who wears human heads in his ears, red horn. Now let me say something about the quality of this construction. That, though it looks like a hank of hair, it's not, okay? It is a regalia. It's a piece of costume, okay? When you get up close and you put a magnifying glass on it, you can even see the knot, okay, that would have tied it into the hair. That's how carefully the carving was done on this piece. And here we have another pipe. This is Evening Star, okay, and as a celestial snake. Okay. Now what Brown discovered is that the layout of the objects and of the Great Mortuary itself reflects the Milky Way. Okay? It reflects the Milky Way as the path of souls, okay? Which in many Native American traditions, one gets on in the west and exits in the south. And the south is the realm of the dead. And Brown's conclusion was that the objects within the mound, within the Great Mortuary, were actually located in the positions that the supernaturals that they represented would have occupied on the Milky Way. For instance, the bird there with its beak, it's actually pecking someone's head, is a raptor bird who existed on the Milky Way, and if you had done something it disapproved of or couldn't answer certain questions, it would peck your brains out. Okay? So while on the other hand, this is an earth goddess, old woman who never dies. She's holding an ear of maize, and she has a house on the Milky Way. And as you travel as a soul to the realm of the dead, she would ask you in, say, you look tired, maybe you'd like a little soup or something. And so she was more of a mother type. Okay? And then we, of course, have Morningstar. And Morningstar, of course, does the wonderful thing of leading the sun out of the beneath world every morning. So he's a very major figure. Sound familiar, George? Yeah. Oh, sorry. There we go. Now, here we go.
Okay.
All right. This is now in the Museum of the American Indian. What she's holding in front of, is that better? There we go. Okay. All right. Is a basket that held a sacred bundle. And here's our raptor bird, okay, which is, I wish I had a color picture of it. It's kind of red with some whitish deposits in it. And that's this big. It's a pipe. It's a large object. On the southern end, where the realm of the dead should be, there were wooden figures, which Jim Brown identifies as ancestors. And by the way, these were all dressed at the time that the looters were recovered them from the Great Mortuary. Okay. So the placement of these objects within the Great Mortuary reflects a cosmological model, the cosmological model of the night sky. Okay? It also reflects a remarkable object that is currently housed in the Field Museum in Chicago, the Pawnee Star Map, which was a part of the Great Black Star Meteorite bundle that was a very important sacred bundle for the Pawnee. Okay. When this map, okay, and it's a hide, it's a very large hide, about bigger. It was first discovered, the scholars at the Field Museum got all excited because they thought, oh, you know, it's like my celestial globe. It's an accurate representation of the night sky. And the more they talked with Pawnee elders, the more it didn't turn out to be that. It seemed to be more metaphorical. A scholar at the Bell Labs recently ran the objects, the celestial objects on this map to try to determine when it would actually, what it would actually be reflecting. And what they found is that it reflects the dawning of August the 25th, 690 AD, okay, which would be the creation date, the creation date. So what we're looking at, okay, is the moment of creation, and specifically the corona borealis, which is much bigger than it actually is in the sky. For the Pawnee are the gods in council. It's the gods sitting around saying, okay, let's make it happen. Let's create the world. Okay? So if the objects within the Great Mortuary are a reflection of this map, then the Great Mortuary itself is a recreation of creation. Okay? The moment of creation. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty spectacular. Okay, now, Morningstar and several different aspects is very important in Mississippian art. And by the way, the wings and the tail don't mean that he flies like a bird. Dr. George Langford has worked out a proposition that demonstrates that those are on that figure to tell you where it's located. It's a locative that says it's in the sky. And here we see him on this side. This is either Morningstar or a son of Morningstar. And he's carrying a head which may be his father's head, because part of the tradition is that Morningstar and his brother lose their heads. They get in a fight with the giants. And their heads are taken off, and their heads are placed on a pole, and the sons of Morningstar come and slay the giants and take the heads back and put them on Dad and Uncle, and they are immediately revived. Immediately revived. Okay. Now, another great breakthrough. Okay. One of the objects found not in the Great Mortuary, but closely associated with the Great Mortuary in a burial, is this pipe, also from Cahokia. Dr. Brown calls it a Grizzly Man. And if you'll notice, it's got bear claws in the ears. His teeth are pegged. He's hunched back. And this, in terms of skill, I wish I had my cast right here, because it's one of the most beautiful things in terms of capturing a human form, even if it's deformed, that Native Americans have ever produced. He has a rattle in his right hand, and if you look carefully, you can see in his left hand he has a deer head. Well, in the Osage language, which is a Degayan-Siouan language, okay, the name of the Lord, or God, if you will, of the Pleiades is he who holds a deer head in his left hand. So read it and weep. We've got an image of this celestial deity. Okay. Now, getting away from Spiral for a moment, I want to move closer to us. I want to talk about the site of Etowah a little bit, down in Georgia, above Atlanta, which has been excavated several times, particularly Mound C, and of course is very famous for this pair of marble statues that were found at the foot of what would have been the staircase of Mound C. They're about this, right, George? About this big? Yeah.
120 pounds each.
120 pounds each. okay, in marble. They were probably dressed. They certainly, Dr. Steponaitis has demonstrated that some of the discoloration you see is ointment that's probably been placed on them during rituals. Okay, their faces, you can see the face paint. We believe that this idea of showing the teeth protruding from the parted lips is like rigor in the dead, is a way of demonstrating that these people are not of this world. They're of another world. We think that they're probably the ancestors of the ruling lineage at Etowah. And look how finely they're carved. Even underneath the legs, okay, are carried through. And this is marble. Okay. Remember, we're dealing with a people who, yes, they had copper, but they did not have hard tools to use to carve. They used stone tools to make these objects. Also at Etowah, we get the Rogan Plates, which are copper pieces, okay, probably at one time attached to sacred bundles. There's some question about whether they were actually made at Etowah or not. They may have been made at Cahokia. They're certainly the classic Braden style, but the quality of the work should be obvious to you. And by the way, how thin are they? They're almost foil, okay? And how would you carve something? How would you make something like that? A student of mine has recently demonstrated that they had a template which they would carve in wood, okay, and then they would shape the copper within the template, but look at the detail. How do you keep the template from moving around? My student has looked at several other copper pieces and was able to detect pine sap on the back. And so what it appears is that they would heat pine sap, pour it in the template, then put the copper in, and then once the pine sap hardened, anyone who's ever tried to get it off their fingers knows, it would keep the copper in one place, and so allow it to be carved. We believe these images are Morningstar. Okay. Ceramics were interesting, well made during the Mississippian period. This piece from the Nodina phase in Arkansas, about 1300, 1500, is now in the Art Institute of Chicago, and it shows actually a pair of underwater serpents or panthers. And here's another depiction of an underwater panther with his great curly tail. Okay. This is also from Arkansas and probably represents a feasting vessel of some type. Here's the back. And do you see that swirl on the back of the head? Okay. This is, it used to be called a swastika, but that's politically incorrect now, so we call it a swirl cross. Okay. Dr. Langford, again, has been able to identify this as the beneath world marker, which tells us that this putty cat is to be associated with the underwater otherworld. These are all things that happen in the workshop. This is what, when you put a lot of good minds together, there's going to be magic. Okay. This is the Westbrook figurine. It's fire clay, okay? And it's been tested. We know it comes from the Cahokia region. And it shows the corn mother, or perhaps old woman, emerging out of a shrine or sacred bundle basket right here. And from her hands grow what seems to be maize, okay, and sunflowers. Do you see the sunflower on the back? Right here. This is a wonderful thing. So I'm just giving you a little survey of what the art looks like. Okay. Now our friend Morningstar, interesting how the titles of these things change. It was originally known as Big Boy, and then that wasn't politically correct, so it became the seated warrior figure. But now we know it as Morningstar. And we can associate part of the regalia, such as these faces worn in the ears, with copper pieces that have been found associated with ear flares and regalia. And just recently, there have been a series of murals, polychrome murals, recovered from the site of Picture Cave in Missouri that seem to depict the same individual. Okay. Now, all this, without going to details about how we got there, depicts a world model that reflects the Earth floating in a cosmic sea, okay, and with a variety of supernatural inhabitants in both the above world and the beneath world. And most Native Americans believe that the beneath world, not most, but a good many, believe that the beneath world rotates up at the setting of the sun and becomes the night sky. Okay. Now, this cosmology and these supernaturals all were reflected in the social order of Mississippian peoples. They were governed by ranked divine chiefs, people who inherited their position. At least in the southeast, many of these groups were matrilineal, so descent was carried through the female line. And we know that the great son, or the ruler of Natchez, okay, considered himself to be able to come out in the morning and greet his brother the sun. And we have a record of how that was done by the French, that the Lord of Natchez would go out and clap his hands. And then, as the sun rose, he would show the sun the direction it would go that day. Well, you say, hey, yeah, big deal. East to west. Does the sun go exactly the same path every day? It does not, okay? And it shows you the level of celestial knowledge that these people had, that they were close observers of both the night sky and solstitial astronomy. Okay. Now, one of the sites that I've worked with closely is the archaeological site of Moundville, Alabama. And we're very lucky to have in our group Jim Knight, who's a professor of anthropology at the University of Alabama, and is one of the, he knows just about as much about this place as anybody coming and going. Okay. Dr. Steponaitis, didn't you do your dissertation on the ceramics of Moundville? And essentially the site is 28 mounds around about a 34 acre plaza. Okay. Today it has a lovely museum that we've just started, or we've just finished rebuilding. Okay. Now this, however, is the major mound there. It's Mound B, and it's about 68 feet tall. The scholars believe it was the residence of the man in charge. And this is the museum, as it's recently been redone. And I thought you might like to see. Okay, this is the entrance, and over on the right we have reinstalled the objects with interpretation to help the viewer. Essentially, before this was $6.5 million, if you want to know what it cost. Before this was done, the last time there had been any major reinstallation or redesign of the exhibits was 1956. So that's a long time to sit on one museum exhibit situation. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do was to take the archaeological information about the regalia that people of the Mississippian period wore and turn it into three-dimensional objects that the general public could appreciate. So I'm not necessarily always a lover of mannequins, but this seems to work. Okay? We used Native Americans, okay, for the models. Okay? Every face is a Native American face. Here you have what we believe to be the royal family, if you will, of Moundville. And they're shown in the process of greeting a bride from the central Mississippi Valley. And this image is straight out of the DeBry engravings, which you can see today. And not only is that spectacular, boy, that gets the oohs and ahs when they come in, but we use Native American craftspeople to do the work. Look at the feather work here, okay? All hand dyed, okay? And we've taken Native American themes on the cases, such as this is the first time that the duck bowl, the stone duck bowl, it's not a duck, it's a snake bird, has returned to Moundville since, I don't know, Vin, when, 1905. It had been in the, it's now in the Smithsonian collection, and we had to pull out all the stops to get it brought back to Moundville where it ought to be. Okay. And also the cat monster pipe, okay, which is normally in the Peabody Institute at Harvard, and it is now on display at Moundville. It's of a particular limestone, which Dr. Steponaitis has been able to identify as coming from right on the Mississippi River in the vicinity of Natchez. Now, Moundville is famous for its pallets, its stone pallets. This one is the one you've probably seen, the rattlesnake desk. This is the one that's most published. Okay? It's made from sandstone, and some of the quarries from where the sandstone was mined is actually on the campus of the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa, upriver from Moundville. Okay. This is my favorite, however, the Willoughby Desk, okay, which is a bit eroded. It's shale, and it has a lot of complex iconography on it, a lot of complex symbolism, and I want to deal with that symbolism now for you. I want to take a single object and go through that, tell you what we can learn. Okay. Now here's what's carved. Okay. We have a pair of hands dropping an object that we call a bilobed arrow. You have this with two skulls in the middle, which I have identified as a sacred bundle. Okay. And here, when this was first described, it was called a phantasmagoric, which we call it as old pineapple sometimes, the students do, because of this. Now, you can divide the palette into three distinct working areas. Here's the phantasmagoric, here's the bundle, and here's the hands dropping a bilobed arrow. Okay. Now, I told you I was able to determine that the central piece was probably a sacred bundle. Here is a Pawnee, the Evening Star Sacred Bundle, which is in the Field Museum. You can see how it's carefully bound. These are pipe stems on the exterior. But this is the First Man bundle, the bundle of the first man. The Pawnee themselves will tell you, yes, it's the skull of First Man, but no, it's not. We broke that a long time ago. That's the skull of a chief we attached to take its place. Okay? What's in the bundle is not known because it has not been opened and recorded time. But if you'll compare the two in terms of the wrapping, you can see the similarity, okay, within them. So I believe that actually the symbols on this palette represent the sacred objects that were laid out on this pallet. Dr. Steponaitis has been able to demonstrate that these pallets were used as like portable altars within bundles, within sacred bundles. Now, Dr. Knight and Judith Frank, in a close study done a few years ago, took a long look at the phantasmagoric, and they were working on the principle that it was an insect. And some of the Native Americans that we had there working with us said, oh, we know what that is. That's the tobacco moth. And if you look closely, here is one. You can see the curved proboscis and the antenna. The other wing has kind of slipped off. Okay. Butterflies extend their wings this way. Moths keep them up like that. Okay. Okay. Now, the Sphinx or hawk moth fertilize plants. They're night flyers. They fertilize plants of which tobacco and potatoes and tomatoes, I'll give you the name in a second, are members of, but most importantly for what I'm saying is datura. Now I don't think datura grows around here, but it does grow here. We have it, it's quite prominent in Texas. We call it loco weed out there because it'll drive the cattle crazy. But it's a powerful hallucinogen, okay, that if not administered correctly, if one's going to take it, can kill you very, very, very quickly. Okay, so okay, these are the datura in my backyard. Okay, and what we'll do, okay, is when they're blooming, I'll have a mass of them, and the blossoms only stay up a day. And they are very sweet smelling. In fact, I have enough, it perfumes the entire neighborhood. Okay? And if you sit out there, usually with a Jack Daniels in hand, in a bit you'll hear them coming because they're large enough that you can actually hear them and actually see them. And they lay their eggs on the leaves of the datura, and the leaves are actually the poisonous or hallucinogenic part. Okay. I don't know how many of you had a grandmother or mother with a garden that grew tomatoes, and you got exiled out there to pick the big worms off the tomato plants. That's something that we had to do. And this is the one that I repeatedly dropped down my sister's back. But this is what it looks like fully grown. Okay? And interestingly, this is caterpillar imagery from shell work from Spiral, that they seem to have recognized this caterpillar. And interestingly, from Spiro is this incredible carved crystal representation of a pupa, the pupa stage of a moth or butterfly. It was probably part of a sacred bundle. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever lay your eyes on. Every time I look at it, the tongue comes out. It's fantastic. Okay. Now, at Moundville and at other areas, there are on bottles representations, or what we call pars pro toto representations of this moth. Okay? The part equals the whole. Here's the proboscis, okay, and then the wings are on either side. Okay? Spouted bottle. Now, let me go back. How do I go back then?
Just click on previous slide, the second thing from the top.
Okay.
Right in that list, yeah.
Okay. Now I don't know about you, but everyone has got to have medicine, you know, that you've gotten from the pharmacist that's in your medicine cabinet. And brown plastic bottle, got a label on it, says RX, which is take thou and make thou, got the name of the doctor, got your name, has the medication, has when you're to take it, and then usually there's something about counterindications or take with a full stomach. Is that label about the exterior of that bottle, or is it about the contents? Tell me. It's about the contents. All right, so what do you think this information is on the exterior of the bottle? It's about the contents of that bottle. Okay? And though it has not been tested, I hope it will. By the way, archaeologists, please don't wash everything. Okay? I think it probably held what Native Americans would say is medicine, or datura perhaps from the pupa of the insect that was used in rituals. Okay? Something I wouldn't want to do on Saturday night, but there you have it. Okay? Okay. Now, to show you the extent of this, what I think is probably a cult, here's our friend from the Willoughby Desk, wing, pineapple, eye, proboscis, from the Kiva Mound in New Mexico at exactly the same time. Okay? It's not enough that we have this figure with the proboscis. Would you look at the wing pattern, please? It's the same wing pattern. Okay? This probably represents the fact that this cult of datura was extremely widespread. Okay? And whether it began in the Southwest and came east or vice versa is yet to be understood. But through the work of Jim Knight and Judith Frank, we're beginning to get a handle on this, and it tells us about the interconnectedness of Native American culture. Okay, now to Etowah. Okay, I've shown you the marble statues. This is Mound C, which is a major, this was the Westminster Abbey of the site. This is where the elites were all buried. Okay, there's our friends, the marble statues. Okay. In front of Mound A, which is 74, 75 feet tall. Okay. Now, out of that grave, out of Mound C, there are numerous gorgets or shell objects that were hung around the neck. Some of them are anthropomorphic. You can see this high, it's called the Hightower style. Okay, you can see a figure. Okay, he's got something in his hand. He has what we think is a sword blade in the other hand. Okay, and his feet are in a dancing posture. See that raised knee? Okay, we call him dances with Mothra. Okay, the students do. I was brokenhearted when one of my colleagues not only had never heard of Mothra, but they had never heard of Godzilla, which shows you how old I'm beginning to get. But we call him Dances with Mothra because the name we commonly use for this supernatural, it's from Moundville, here he is here, is Mothra. Do you see? He's being held in the hand of this fellow who has one of those swords, and he's about to do something really bad to that moth. Okay, probably cut his head off. Mothra, 1961, yeah. Now, there's other gorgets in the Hightower style, such as seated in display. Okay, which is a seated figure. It seems to have insects' wings. Look at the pattern, again, the same pattern we saw on Mothra. And then there's dances in combat. It looks like my students on the square on Saturday night. Okay. And this is one that I've been working on, another category, dances with snakes. This one was badly damaged, and if it hadn't been for really important photography carried out by David Dye at the University of Memphis, we would not have been able to make out what this is. But because of David's work, was able to see that he's holding a human-headed serpent. Do you see that? Okay, and look at the tail is forked, like Mothra's tail is forked. It's like, as a supernatural, Mothra can transform into several different forms. He's dancing. He's got him by the neck. Those of you, if you're Southerners, you're always warned about picking up snakes, and if you do, get it right behind the head so that it can't turn around and bite you. Okay. Now, notice many of the other figures that I showed you had wings. This does not. What did I say wings do? They're locatives that tell you they're in the sky. This one's not in the sky. It's got a skull. Down here, there's probably another skull here. Where do you think it was, if it's got a skull there? In the realm of the dead, that this action is taking place in the beneath world. Now, human-headed serpents. Are there many depictions? Yes, there are many depictions. This is a Craig-style shell fragment from Spyro. We see a human-headed snake there. Okay. Got long, I call them dandruff dusters, long earrings. Okay. Now, the head from Dances with Snakes closely resembles the head on that shell fragment. I can't say that they're identical, but there's a lot of similarities between the two. It can be that we're dealing with the same supernatural. Okay? Now, he's got that snake here. Okay? He has a clawed hand. Here's another one in our sequence. This is Dances with Heads. Whose head is he dancing with? I think we're dealing with a story where that snake is going to be decapitated. And it's going to be decapitated by this individual, okay, who here he's shown with wings. Okay? No. So when you take these together, Mothra, Heads, Display, Combat, Dances with Snakes, we get a set. We get a set that probably, like the frames, the individual cells or frames in an old piece of motion picture film, tell a story. They tell a story just like the old stop-action representations in photography. Now, which brings me to another point. Working with this material, it's a bit like, I'm sure everyone, if you haven't, you will, someone in the family passes on, and you have to go to their home and have to kind of get things ready, either to sell the home, you start going through their possessions and so forth, and to get them ready for distribution. And imagine if you went up into the attic and you found a canister, an old film canister, and you opened it up and it didn't have a whole reel of film in it. It had individual pieces of editing cuts. And you could look at it and say, well, I don't know what this is. There's no credits, but it's got to be a Western because look what they're wearing, okay? And someone's got a pistol drawn. And this has got to be the end because somebody's riding off into the sunset with a girl on the back, okay? And so you start a storyboard. You put pieces up to try to learn more about this story, and hopefully you can get enough of it to recreate the story. That's the work that we do. That's the sort of work that we're doing, bit by bit, piece by piece, painstakingly. Okay, now moving on, there are Mothra patterned wings on a pot from the Belle Meade site in Arkansas. Here we have a gorget from St. Mary's, Missouri, with two. This guy must be tough. He's got two of these guys in his hands. Check out the wings. It's the same creature as we've seen at Moundville. So it talks about, this is the nature of the widespreadness of this creature. There is such a word as widespreadness. Okay. So we can say that Mothra is a supernatural who crosses the boundary of style regions, demonstrating ideological interaction in the Mississippian world. That there may be differences in style, but there's certain features of the belief system that cross these style regions. And it makes a cult. It's what we call a cult. And a cult is essentially a node of ritual intensification within an existing religious system. A dramatic example is the cult of the saints within Roman Catholicism, within the Anglican Church, within Eastern Orthodoxy, where even though these are different images of the Virgin Mary, the positioning of the figure and the different aspects of regalia tell you specifically which virgin it is. Okay. This is also a general rule of thumb that we've tried to apply to the interpretation of ancient Mississippian material. Now, we know that there are cults and were cults amongst contemporary Native Americans. The most famous is the ghost dance, founded by Wachovia, but that's not the only cult. Okay? And recently, some of the directions that we've been taking in trying to understand this ancient and great art style is the identification of this specific cults. And we strongly believe that with more effort and with a larger survey of the corpus and with more people looking at the material that we're going to find out information about this. Because I said at the beginning, this is a past that doesn't just belong to Native Americans, it belongs to you, okay? We are Americans here, and this is part of our tradition, okay? And I don't know why we should not know this ancient past just as well as we know the ancient past of Europe or Asia. And I think it's high time that we begin to learn that past. Thank you very much.